was incredibly supportive of her, of Jess Butterworth, whose Jerusalem is such a triumph.
He helped. Heathcote Williams wrote a sort of book about the speakers in Hyde Park Corner. It was turned into a Penguin book, but Harold got it published, really. And then it was turned into a play, and he became a very successful playwright because Harold gave him start, really. And Harry was in touch with him just the other day, wasn't he?
Yes, I mean, no writer who Harold supported ever forgot that or got over the wonderful sense of connection and support and mutual respect that Harold nurtured in writers. He had no greater respect, I think, for an actor who wrote. That was his, he just felt that great fellowship with someone, taking that similar risk.
Well, Doug Lucy told me that he attended his play Grace in the early 90s, and Doug was there that, I guess it was the press night or something, and Harold warmly congratulated him. It was one of Doug's fondest memories of writing plays for 35 years.
Here's a bit of Harold that isn't generally known. When they absolutely destroyed the birthday party, it was a terrific, terrible disaster for him. A very young man, 27, his first full-length play being absolutely destroyed. I was living in a bedsitter or something, and he came to see me. He says, "You know what I've done?" He said, "I've written another full-length play, and they can go," I forget the exact words they wrote. They could go and bleep, bleep, bleep. He wrote it, and it was the Hot House. And then I said to him, "What's happened to the Hot House?" And he said, "It's not good enough. I'm not going to have it published or performed." But he did 20 years later. I remember once I was at a mutual friend of ours. I had everything that Harold had ever written except a copy of his novel, The Dwarfs. I said to this friend of mine, Johnny Rees, who was, Johnny Rees was an actor, who was the actual Cliff in Look Back in Anger in Real Life. That's something else. And I said to Johnny, "Whatever happened to The Dwarfs? I've never got a copy of it. I read it." And in those days, lots of actors and lads and ladies had their books on bricks, planks, resting on bricks. We reached up for a book, it was about 3 in the morning, and there was a collapse of planks and books, and out from underneath stood this manuscript, which was 30 years old, by that time literally yellow with age, and it was a freshly typed copy, 30 years before, of The Dwarfs. So he lent me it. I reread it, and that night, one of the main characters in it was a chap who is called Len in the book, but actually his name is Mick Goldstein, lives in Australia. At 1 in the morning, the phone rang. I was a bit surprised. It was Mick, and I was just laughing at something his character had said in the book. And it was Mick calling from Australia, saying, "Hello, I'm coming to London." So it all seemed to fall into place. And I called Harold the next day and said, "Why won't you have The Dwarfs published?" He was well able to then, you see. It was years later, when he was famous. He said, "Because it's not good enough." I said, "Well, I've just read it, and take my word for it, I think it is." And then I went back to Canada, and 3 weeks later he called me and said, "I've just spent the last 3 weeks editing and cutting The Dwarfs, and it's going to be published." And one of the nice things about him is the person he took to the book launch wasn't Antonia, it was the girl from Hackney, Jennifer Gibson, who's the main character, the only woman in the book. And so that's what happened. And I only say that because he was quite capable of being extreme, just as encouraging as he was to young people. He could be very hard on himself. He really could.
What were his habits as a writer? Did he write daily? Did he have any habits? Did he write in bed? Did he write in the toilet? What was his way as a writer?
I don't know.
Very irregular, I think. I think he wrote in bursts of tremendous... I think Henry put his finger on it in the film when he says that the room must have been tightly coiled within him and came roaring out. I think again and again Harold had the experience of something roaring out of him after the blue, what we call in England for fireworks, the blue touch paper had been lit by something, an image or a word or a phrase, and then something comes through.
That's very different from the kind of writer, like a very good writer like Edward Bond writes when I was working with him, every day except Sunday. It's a job, he does it, and other writers I know do that. Don't think Harold did that at all. It's what he says, it's all there.
I found this wonderful quote. You mentioned the story about Murphy, the book, because Harold loved Beckett, but why? And this is what he said about Beckett's writing. I suddenly felt that what his writing was doing was walking through a mirror into the other side of the world, which was in fact the real world. What I seemed to be confronted with was a writer inhabiting his innermost self. The book was also very funny. But I'm so grateful for him articulating that, because I can, as an idiot, I can get hold of that idea of trying to get through past oneself to the point where there's something worth saying about the world, and then trying to say it as economically and as intensely and as hopefully funnily as possible.
I think that could well apply to Pinter's own work.
Well, of course, he's literally aspiring to that. That's his model. He worshipped Beckett for that reason and considered himself an infinitely lesser writer, did he not?
I think so. I think so. He did love him, his writing and him. He was a very nice fellow, Beckett. I've never met anybody who didn't say he was the nicest fellow in the world.
And he loved Harold very much. Harold's favourite book was Ulysses. He kept that, he read that. He never stopped reading it. It was by his bed when he died.
I didn't know that. Isn't that something?
How did they meet, Beckett and Pinter?
Well, Harold, I think, Harold had been writing to Beckett, and very formally, after Godot, and then he began to send his manuscripts to Beckett, and Beckett would reply, and you can see the replies in the British Library. And then Beckett said, let's meet, and Harold went to Paris, and they got roaring drunk together. There's a beautiful little couple of paragraphs about it, and they ended up in some bar in Les Halles or somewhere, and Harold passed out at the table. And when he came to, Beckett had gone. He thought, perhaps I've dreamt the whole thing. It turned out Beckett was driving around his de chevaux all the way around Paris, trying to find Andrew's liver salts, so that Harold could get over his hangover.
Harold told me about that. That's a marvelous story. Tell me about that visit. And he said to a friend of his, I'm just going to see Beckett in Paris. And the man said, really, I've just come back from having lunch with Beckett. He said, why do you hesitate?